Your engine oil just grounded your plane. This bronze speck is a fragment of a connecting rod bushing, part number LW13923. The FAA says 45,152 Lycoming engines may contain it. 3 times in 9 years, the FAA drew a line around the affected engines. 3 times, they redrew it wider. The first airworthiness directive covered specific serial numbers. The second widened the scope to 16,000 engines. The latest one, which took effect 2 days ago, covers 45,152 engines. What happens when the regulator can't find the edge? 45,152 engines. That's not a statistic, it's a nationwide grounding order that landed on every ramp, hangar, and flight line in America. The FAA figure isn't just a bureaucratic estimate, it is the number of Lycoming-powered aircraft now caught in the expanding blast radius of the Bronze Death Directive. This is not some obscure corner of general aviation. We are talking about the backbone of the U.S. flight training fleet: Cessna 172s, Piper Cherokees, Archers, Arrows, Warriors. Everywhere you look, a Lycoming 4-cylinder or 6-cylinder engine sits at the heart of the operation. When the directive hit, the impact was immediate. Flight schools scrambled to pull aircraft from schedules, cancel lessons, and refund solo endorsements. Charter operators found their dispatch rates gutted overnight. Maintenance shops fielded calls from owners who had just discovered that their $300 oil change now came with a side order of regulatory paralysis. For private pilots, the news meant more than a missed weekend flight. It meant the possibility of a $7 bushing grounding a $400,000 airplane, with no guarantee of when or if the engine would be cleared to fly again. The numbers are relentless. 45,000 engines covers nearly every piston-powered single and twin in the training and rental market. The Cessna 172 alone accounts for more than 20,000 aircraft in active service, most with Lycoming 0320 or 0360 engines. Add in the PA-28 series, Cherokees, Archers, Warriors, and the reach of this airworthiness directive becomes clear. The directive does not care if you are flying for fun, for business, or for a living. If your logbook says Lycoming and your build date falls anywhere between 2009 and 2021, you are in the crosshairs. The effect is personal. Owners who keep their airplanes meticulously maintained, who thought they had escaped the last round of airworthiness directives, now find themselves hunting through logbooks and overhaul invoices, searching for any mention of LW 13923. Flight instructors are left explaining to students why the airplane they scheduled last night is now grounded for an indefinite inspection. Some operators have already run the numbers, with average inspection and replacement costs ranging from $1,400 to over $7,000 per engine, multiplied across fleets of a dozen or more aircraft. The compliance bill can easily top 6 figures. And that is just for the inspection. If bronze is found in the oil filter, the real costs begin. For the owner community, this is more than regulatory whiplash. It is a test of trust. Trust in the parts, in the paperwork, and in the system that is supposed to keep them safe. The FAA perimeter keeps expanding, but the burden never shifts off the operator's shoulders. The question hangs in the air: what happens when the regulator cannot find the edge? For now, the only certainty is this. If you fly behind a Lycoming built in the last decade, your engine oil just became the most important document in your aircraft. Cut the filter, read the filings, and keep your receipts. The blast radius has landed. The crisis did not start with a slow leak. It detonated with a factory bulletin and a 10-hour clock. On July 23, 2017, Lycoming issued Mandatory Service Bulletin 632A. The language is blunt. Identification of connecting rods with non-conforming small-end bushings. The bulletin lists serial numbers, mandates inspection and quarantine within the next 10 engine hours, and instructs owners to measure the bushing's inner diameter to within 0.003 of an inch. If it is out of spec, the engine is grounded. No exceptions, no appeals. The technical method is spelled out, but there is a catch. The press-out verification tool does not exist in the field. The bulletin tells owners to contact their Lycoming parts source to obtain the required tool. But there is no part number, no distribution plan, and no clarity on when or if these tools will arrive. Within days, panic spread through owner forums and maintenance shops. 5 reports of uncontained engine failures, connecting rods breaking loose, bronze filings in the oil, engines dead stick on approach. The FAA took one look at the data and skipped the usual comment period. On August 10, 2017, Emergency Airworthiness Directive 2017-16-11 landed with a thud. Compliance is mandatory within 10 engine hours or 30 calendar days, whichever comes first. The legal text waives public input under Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 39.17, subsection B, citing an unsafe condition that could result in an uncontained engine failure. The directive references Lycoming's Mandatory Service Bulletin 632A and its follow-up 632B as the only acceptable inspection methods. It also makes clear, if you find a bad bushing, the engine is grounded until it is replaced. Owners were left scrambling. The compliance window was so tight that AOPA's David Ord called an emergency conference with the FAA and Lycoming. The association's public statement was scathing. Neither the FAA nor Lycoming were willing to share any data or numbers of failures. Cost estimates were missing. The special inspection tool was missing. The only thing in abundance was regulatory pressure. AOPA warned that the Mandatory Service Bulletin's time of compliance would simply not afford the time needed to request and approve an alternative method of compliance after the issuance of an airworthiness directive. In other words, the 10-hour clock started running before most owners even knew what was wrong. Lycoming promised parts and labor allowances for engines still under warranty, but the reality was a supply chain bottleneck, with owners forced to outsource to third-party shops at their own expense. The pattern was set: factory bulletin, emergency airworthiness directive, owners footing the bill, and a data blackout on how many engines had actually failed. The FAA's docket for Airworthiness Directive 2017-16-11 confirmed the urgency, no comments received, and the 10-hour compliance window was non-negotiable. 5 failures triggered a nationwide grounding order, but the true scale of the defect remained hidden. The regulator drew a line, but refused to say how wide the blast radius really was. For the owner, the only reliable warning was what came out of the oil filter. If you saw bronze, you were grounded. If you did not, you were still waiting for the next shoe to drop. This is what happens when the system cannot or will not find the edge of the problem. Cut the filter, read the filings, and keep your receipts. The clock is still ticking. June 2024 brought a cold, hard number to the Lycoming bushing crisis: $17.3 million. That is the FAA's own estimate for what it would cost US operators to comply with the newly proposed expansion. A notice of proposed rulemaking that didn't just redraw the map, it blew it wide open. The draft rule, published in the Federal Register, laid out a compliance projection based on 10,500 engines, but the supporting docket materials made clear the real population could be as high as 16,000. Each engine, each owner, each maintenance shop now stares down a bill that starts at $1,200 for parts, plus labor rates averaging $150 an hour, and climbs from there. The cost math isn't theoretical. The FAA's economic analysis spells it out: 45% labor, 30% parts, 25% indirect costs, and administrative overhead. That is before factoring in downtime, lost revenue, and the logistical nightmare of pulling a fleet's worth of engines out of service for a problem that started with a supplier's tolerance stack-up. This is not the kind of regulatory overreach that comes with a safety net. The compliance window isn't a suggestion, it's a ticking clock. The notice of proposed rulemaking floated a 90-hour extension for low-utilization operators, but the baseline remained brutal: inspect, replace, and document, or ground your airplane. For flight schools and charter operators, the numbers get ugly fast. Multiply the average $4,000 to $7,000 per engine by a dozen trainers, and the compliance bill clears 6 figures before you even get to parts shortages or back-ordered bushings. There is no warranty to cushion the blow. Lycoming's coverage expired in July 2018. From here on, every dollar comes out of the owner's pocket. The FAA's docket says the proposal would supersede Airworthiness Directive 2017-1611 for all engines outside the original serial block. But the inspection method and the burden remain the same. The agency's own preliminary economic analysis admits the estimate is conservative, assuming only half the engines will need a replacement and that administrative costs won't spiral. But anyone who has ever tried to schedule a compliance action during a nationwide airworthiness directive knows that reality rarely matches the spreadsheet. This is the expanding blast radius in action: a $7 bushing, a $17 million invoice, and a regulatory net that just keeps getting wider. When the regulator cannot find the edge, the bill lands on the owner's desk. That is not just scope creep, that is a system running on borrowed trust. The final rule landed in December 2024, and with it came the most unforgiving clock yet: 120 flight hours. That is the directive. No negotiation, no appeals, no wait and see. Every Lycoming-powered aircraft with a suspect part number LW13923 bushing is now under a countdown. The language in Airworthiness Directive 2024-2102 is blunt. Replace the small end, connecting rod bushing within 120 flight hours after the effective date. The inspection-only pathway is gone. If you have not installed the latest solid bushing, your engine's days are numbered, by the tachometer, not the calendar. Operators who thought they could stretch another season or wait for parts are out of time. The Airworthiness Directive's compliance window is a hard line. Hit 120 hours and you are grounded, regardless of your maintenance schedule, your business needs, or your back-ordered parts. The FAA docket is filled with pleas for more time, flight schools, charter operators, and owner groups all asking for a longer window. The agency's response was a single concession: a one-time extension to 180 hours, but only if you submit a maintenance plan and can prove continued airworthiness. For most, the 120-hour deadline stands. This is not a theoretical exercise. Flight instructors are logging every lesson, dispatchers are counting every rental hour, and maintenance shops are triaging which engines to pull first. The final rule's terminating action language makes it clear: once the replacement is done with the approved solid bushing, the repetitive inspections stop. But until then, every hour flown is a step closer to the ground. The paperwork is relentless. Every action must be logged, every replacement documented, every compliance step ready for audit. And for the thousands of engines built between January 2009 and September 2021, the clock started ticking the moment the rule hit the Federal Register. There is no safety net, no second chance if you miss the window. The regulator has drawn the line, and the only certainty is the countdown in your logbook. For owners and operators, this is what regulatory pressure looks like when the blast radius keeps expanding, but the compliance burden never leaves your shoulders. The only way out is through, and the clock is running. March 2026 delivered the final act in a saga that began with 5 failures and now sweeps up 45,000 engines in a paperwork dragnet. The FAA Airworthiness Directive 2026-04-11 does not just close the case, it locks it in a filing cabinet and dares you to find the key. The directive's language is stark. Every owner, every operator, every maintenance shop must produce a signed, dated logbook entry, certifying that the oil filter was cut, the element examined, and no bronze was found. Or, if bronze was found, that the bushing was replaced and the engine is now LW13923 compliant. No signature, no flight. The paperwork is not a suggestion. It is a legal demand baked right into the Federal Register. Inspection results and any subsequent part replacement shall be recorded in the aircraft maintenance records and signed by an authorized individual. This is not just about safety, it is about bureaucratic permanence. The FAA final rule ties compliance credit to the ability to prove on paper that every step was followed. Miss a logbook entry or lose a maintenance invoice, And your airplane is out of compliance, grounded by a missing signature, not a mechanical defect. For owners who bought used aircraft with incomplete records, the nightmare is real. You could spend thousands tearing down a perfectly good engine just to satisfy a paperwork demand for a bushing that may have been replaced years ago. The directive covers every Lycoming model that ever saw a split bronze bushing between 2009 and 2021, regardless of serial number, with a 60-day deadline to file a compliance report after the final inspection. It is a paperwork lock with no escape clause. The FAA has built a regulatory maze where the only way out is through a stack of signed maintenance logs. The defect itself, a $7 split bushing that can destroy a $40,000 engine, has been replaced, but the shadow it casts lives on in the records. The blast radius is not just mechanical, it is administrative, and the cost lands squarely on the owner's dime. When the regulator cannot find the edge of a problem, the paperwork becomes the perimeter. If you want to keep flying, you had better know where every signature lives. Cut the filter, check for bronze, and write it down. That is the only proof that matters now. Bronze doesn't belong in your oil filter. Yet that's exactly where the Lycoming bushing defect announces itself, one microscopic flake at a time. The split bronze bushing, part number LW13923, sits at the wrist pin end of the connecting rod. Its job is simple: keep the rod centered, keep the motion smooth, keep the engine alive. But when the supplier's tolerances slipped, that split bushing started to migrate, not by inches, not even by millimeters, but by thousandths. That's all it takes. Each vibration cycle works the split just a hair wider. The bushing walks, axially, toward the rod's shoulder. The split line opens, and the bronze begins to shed. First as dust, then as visible specks, then as a trail of metallic debris winding through the oil system. This isn't theoretical. Mechanics have cut open oil filters and found the signature: streaks of bronze on the pleats, flecks trapped in the folds, a faint metallic sheen that shouldn't be there. If you see it, you're already behind the curve. The bronze doesn't just float harmlessly, it circulates, scouring bearings and journals, grinding away at the engine's internals. And as the bushing keeps migrating, the risk grows. Eventually, the split can unseat completely. The rod loses its support at the wrist pin, and the next thing through the case wall is a broken connecting rod, not oil. That's the endgame: a catastrophic failure, total power loss, and a repair bill that makes the original $7 bushing look like a rounding error. Every engine that carries a suspect bushing is a rolling evidence file. The only early warning is what comes out of that oil filter. Bronze in the pleats isn't just a maintenance note, it's a subpoena. It means the defect is no longer hidden, and if the filings are there, the clock is already running. Warranty coverage for the split bronze bushing ran out on July 26, 2018. After that date, every inspection, every replacement, every hour of shop labor lands squarely on the owner's dime. There is no factory safety net, no reimbursement check in the mail. There is just a bill for $1,425 per inspection, multiplied by every engine in a school or rental fleet. For a flight school with 10 trainers, that is over $14,000 just to check for bronze. If you find it, the real costs begin. A 4-cylinder engine faces a $2,170 bushing replacement. 6-cylinder engines run nearly $7,000. Those numbers do not include downtime, lost revenue, or the administrative slog of tracking every compliance step in the logbooks. But the system leaves one practical lever in the owner's hands. The FAA's latest directive does not require an A&P mechanic for the first line of defense. It requires vigilance and a $70 tool. Any owner can buy a filter cutter, slice open the spin-on filter after an oil change, and spread the pleats on a white rag. Bronze specks are the only early warning you get. If you see them, you are grounded. If not, you log the inspection and keep flying. The filter cutter is not just a tool, it is a shield against a paperwork-driven grounding. For those with incomplete maintenance records, or for buyers inheriting someone else's problem, this is the only affordable safeguard left. The message is blunt. The blast radius will keep expanding, the paperwork will keep piling up, and the regulator still cannot find the edge of the problem. But for $70 and 20 minutes of sweat equity, you can cut through the uncertainty. Do not wait for a letter from the FAA. Cut the filter, check for bronze, and write it down. That is how you keep your airplane in the air on your terms. Today, 45,152 engines sit in regulatory limbo, and the blast radius keeps expanding on the owner's dime. The FAA still cannot draw a clear edge around the risk. If the only warning is bronze dust in your filter, how many failures go uncounted? When a cheap bushing drives six-figure compliance, pilots deserve real answers. Demand transparency. Start with your next oil change. Share your experience below. This story is not finished.